Oh, well. Hello and welcome to another podcast. I'm Hayley Brown and I'm super excited to be in the studio again with a guest that I've been trying to get here for a while because he really took me back when I met him in terms of his mission and his work that he's been doing, but also the book that he's recently published. Jassa Ahluwalia, welcome. Welcome to Birmingham, but it's not welcome to Birmingham because this is one of your towns, isn't it?
Yeah. Midlands is very much home. Yeah, like my mum, whole mum side of the family, West Midlands. Yeah, my grandfather's the architect who designed the rotunda. So
that's a really good
claim
to fame.
I get to say hi every time I rock up at the station.
So the reason I have been so desperate to have this conversation is definitely a personal one. So I apologise in advance that I will be waffling and sharing and getting a lot off my chest in terms of what we're going to discuss today. Jassa's book called BothNotHalf is about redefining cultural heritage and understanding. I'll let you explain. But for me personally, it really was a breath of fresh air because it's not easy as someone that is mixed race. Myself being a mixed lady of Jamaican heritage who presents white. Now, my sister has dark hair. I have blonde hair. If you want to see the video of this, it will be interpreted into sign language on YouTube and you can just see how white presenting we both are. But we are not white and I am Jamaican. And it's almost given me kind of like the safe space to explore my identity and how I've referred to myself over the years. And as I turn 40 this year, I have really gone on a journey and I really thank you for publishing a book that has just made it safe. Because I think a lot of people that are mixed felt like they can't take up space from the more pressing conversation that is obviously inequality, discrimination and racism that's, apparent around us. Even more so for me and you because we see our family experiencing it. We're not just on the outside, we're in looking at it, but then in our personal journeys not maybe experiencing it in the same way. And I just didn't feel safe to ever really get out any kind of conversation about being mixed from a personal perspective because you just feel like you're taking up space. And you'd hear terms like white tears and things like this. Yeah. And I have had so many people say, thank you for talking about this. Jassa, can you please give me, so for the audience that don't obviously know, I want you to just give me some background of how you were raised and your identity.
Yeah. Just before I do that, I just want to say like that I had that exact same experience. I know we'll probably come on to this, but when I first stood for election to my union's race equality committee and I was a bit nervous about taking up that space. I didn't feel like I was the right kind of mixed, or was it appropriate for me to be taking one of those seats on that committee? And then a Nigerian lady at the end who was also on the committee came up to me and really made it clear to me that I belonged there and that I had a right to be there. And she showed me photos of all of her mixed heritage grandkids. And that experience really taught me, we do have a right to speak, but I think that's needs to be balanced with a duty to listen. And I think that's the thing, wherever we are, exercising our right to speak, we also have a duty to listen. I think those go hand in hand. I think, if you are listening, then it's also, you're totally fine to be speaking as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So me, origins.
In terms, obviously this is Inadequate Mother. This is for parents because I think there's a need for parents that, sorry, I'm getting told off by Carl. Who also has mixed children. And we've just literally, the producer of this show has been telling us, there's just not enough conversation out there, especially in this woke world where new concepts and society's changing. But for me personally, I've definitely felt inadequate in this area of being able to understand myself, but also my mixed kids. So
Yeah.
how have your parents, how did they raise you to, develop your identity and your...
It's so, when I first sat down to write the book, I felt like I had to, because of the way in which a lot of these conversations sometimes go, it's often about people sharing how difficult things were, the sort of hurdles they had to overcome, a sense of feeling out of place from an early age and all of that. And I was sort of racking my brains and I was like, that's not actually my story. But it's interesting that I felt I needed that in order to have a sense of legitimacy in the conversation. And actually what I realized was that the ease and joy and simplicity of my upbringing was to be celebrated and actually could serve as an example for what is possible.
Okay.
And I think my parents did an incredible job of just creating this, some of it was just circumstance. Mm-hmm. I was growing up in the Midlands in Leicester, in a city which is incredibly diverse.
Mm-hmm.
The Diwali celebrations in Leicester are like some of the biggest outside of India. So I never felt like, there are multiple gurdwaras in Leicester as well. So that connection to my Sikh identity, it just felt ever present and it was around me. And, my grandfather, my turban wearing Punjabi grandfather, was a teacher at my primary school. So my identity was very much known and accepted and established within my school. So even though I looked the way I did, I was Mr. Walia's grandson, and therefore there was no sort of question of my identity. And then at home, my parents worked really hard to ensure just constant exposure to my heritage. Mm-hmm. And, I think my mum made a real effort. So my dad would speak to me in Punjabi before I could even speak back. Mm-hmm. If he was changing my clothes or something when I was lying on the mat or whatever, he would just be like, put your arm here, move your leg there. So I was sort of being immersed in it from that early age. And my mum also made an effort to learn the language to an extent that she could at least, there was never a sense of a language that I only spoke with my dad or my grandparents. I understood that she wasn't as fluent, but she had an ability to, say, "Chup kar," be quiet, "Hat ja," stop that.
Wow.
So if I was being disciplined by my mum in a Punjabi setting, everybody else would know what was going on. So there was a sense of integration. Mm-hmm. And then we would just mix our language at home, get the dud from the fridge, mm-hmm. get the milk from the fridge. And so it was a bit like, I think this is why Goodness Gracious Me was such a hit, that sort of mixing of words, culture, that's full sort of integration. And that was my whole experience growing up. So I never really thought about my identity in that way, because I had this very whole, very integrated upbringing. There was one instance at school with a teacher who told me off for doing an Indian accent, but
really?
Yeah, she was, I was doing an impersonation of my grandparents, and she told me to stay back at the end of class
because she thought you were being racist.
Yeah,
offensive.
Yeah, she thought it was offensive, and I was like, and I thought initially that because she knew my background, she was South Asian herself, and I thought that she was sort of looking out for me, being like, look, I know you're taking the mick, but bear in mind, people might not necessarily know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that at all. She was just like, it's straight up offensive. Don't ever do that again. And I was like, but my brown classmates were getting involved as well. And why aren't they being told off? So that was one, it definitely, it burnt itself onto my memory. I definitely remember it. And it's, it's an incident I do talk about in the book, but I remember it because it was more of a one-off. That wasn't a regular occurrence. I had fun with it. I would, I was on a train.
I wonder if that was a one-off because that was the one-off person that said something or felt that they could say something, but actually many people have maybe thought that.
Yeah, maybe. I guess this is also, this is the white privilege at play, that, I'm sort of insulated and protected from, racial tension within society because of my whiteness. So I think that's a big part of it as well, because my sister's, darker presenting, and she definitely experienced more sort of overt racism in a way that I never did.
It's interesting you're talking about not feeling safe because you didn't have as much of a struggle, and if you'd have maybe grown up in different environments and you needed a little bit more protection, I know people that went to private grammar schools, got scholarships, and they would have to take off their uniform before going home, and because of the area that they lived in and things like that. So yeah, I can imagine. So what you're saying is your memoir, because it's not a book of struggle, it's just your beautiful story, has kind of like opened up people's minds to what it can be, and just giving...
my childhood at least, and that upbringing for sure, you know. And it's also, my culture was never forced on me. I came to love it because it was just available. It was available, and when I engaged with it, I experienced joy and I experienced love. There was never this sense of like, you have to do this because this is your heritage, this is your culture, and you have a duty.
That's amazing.
It was just, here it is. Do you wanna get involved? If you do, wonderful. And when I did, like I say, it just felt joyous. It was not coming from a place of like duty or responsibility. And
it was available. And this, again, I think we should touch on the fact that, I mean, I don't know what language you consider your first language, but with the deaf community, I think when you see such a difference when deaf people are raised in an environment where both is available, both sign language and spoken language, both deaf culture and hearing culture, and it's just kind of merged together, or, you know, it's not forced on them, it's just available. And then, it's rare you see that, but there's some families that get it so good. I hope, like yourself, they can share in a way that you have, to say, you know, this is a beautiful thing, and we are both not half. We can...
that's such a wonderful way of like drawing the parallel. I'd never really thought about that.
It really is, honestly. The deaf community has helped me, along with yourself, understand the intersectionality of our identity. And that's a term that's banging around loads, but I'm often having to explain to my friends in terms of how we have these different layers to ourselves that they're just quite specific to us, and we're expected as well, like as a mom, like you've got so much responsibility going on, and so much you need to think about with your kids, and then now you're expected to know all these different layers of yourself and like do all this self-reflection. And when you hear these terms, it can be just a little bit overwhelming, but I think with, you know, podcast conversations and books like yourselves, it makes it a little bit
sometimes
easier.
You don't necessarily need to sort of understand it so sort of theoretically as well, you know. Like my mum wasn't sat there thinking I'd need to sort of be, you know, thinking about intersectionality and like cultural heritage, and like these weren't terms or thoughts she was having in with those explicit words. It was just that this is a big part of who they are.
So did you teach her, like, I know your sister also lesbian and...
she would identify as queer.
Queer.
And lesbian, I guess,
Yeah. But so in terms of like all these intersectionality layers and things, would you say that you've taught your mom? Because that's how I feel parenting is going now. Our kids are kind of guiding us.
My mum's been wonderful in the way that she's sort of remained open to learning. And I think that's, I think why so many people think of my mum as it has such youthful energy is because she's like constantly learning, responding, taking stuff on board. That's a lovely sort of relationship, two-way relationship to have. But like I say, she didn't, when she set out in the way that, you know, our family life was, it was more just, this is obviously important to like make sure that this culture is available.
You say it's obvious, but it's not obvious.
No, but it was what I mean is it was obvious to my mum,
and that's amazing. Like your mum deserves. I'm going to get your mum on here.
No, you really should.
I'm going to call her up because she's lovely. I've spoke to her loads.
It was. She was like, well, we're growing up in England, so we're going to get plenty of exposure to you know, British and English culture. Our Punjabi and Indian heritage, it might be more difficult. And I think she also understood, like once she saw me after I was born, that like as white as I was, you know, the reason my name is such a strong Punjabi name is because that was also part of my parents' decision to sort of make sure I had something that was mine that was Punjabi. It's funny, I still get lots of Punjabis who like question me like, do you know who that is? It's like, yeah, it's my name. It's like they feel the need to be like, just so are you aware?
Like, let me teach you. Let me make sure
Yeah.
you're educated.
Exactly.
I get like when I see, honestly, with my children. So I do my daughter's hair, and Carl, the producer, was just talking about his concerns about, being able to look after Afro-Caribbean hair and things like that. And I get this constant, like, you did it, or how? And it's like, because that's my child, and I've learned how to do a hair, but also I am of that heritage. So just because I don't have that hair doesn't mean I don't know how to look after it. And it constantly having, like, the amount of times, and sometimes people come over and just say, I just want you to know how amazing it is what you're doing. And I'm like, because they see me as white, so
right, yeah.
Yeah,
so they're trying to be like nice about it, but it's making you feel
it's a trigger.
You're feeling alienated by it. Like,
well, I'm just like, I don't get recognized as how I feel, because as again, like when we've talked about this fluidity, we think of our heritage of, we're born, we're here, okay, and we used to use maths. And I used to use maths to describe myself when I'd say, I'm part Jamaican, and people give me that puzzled look, and then you go, quarter, and they go, and they do the maths, and then you go, okay. And it's like...
And it's so incredibly racist. Like the fractional, the sort of the mathematical, these were literally the ways in which enslaved people were sort of defined.
Yeah.
It's
your purity and your whiteness is a mathematical equation. Like, you're going to cut me open and I'm going to have some kind of like blood that's quarter. Or...
Yeah. But it's literally because if you were, a quarter black, that meant you would be, enslaved. And if you, I don't know, like, I go into sort of like the history of this in my book about the ways in which this sort of like the ways in which race has been defined in different settings depending on what the sort of the political motivations are. But this sort of like fractional way of thinking is just, it's a direct legacy of slavery. And I think it's absolutely abhorrent and appalling that sort of language is still, we sort of use it uncritically. That even I was using it uncritically. That's just the language I inherited. And I think the big thing for me when I articulated Both Not Half, it wasn't actually a change in how I thought of myself. It was almost like, because I'd always thought of myself as both. And this is again the thing, like I was raised in a way I was Punjabi. But the only way I knew how to explain that to other people was to say I am half Punjabi. And then when I got into acting and the world performing, where what you look like is just such a big part of the work that you get or don't get, it was only then that I started, and realizing that I didn't have access to this part of myself, I started to really think about it. And so I mean, this is the origin of where Both Not Half came from. I literally, and from a place of frustration, made a little comedy video that I put on Instagram of me speaking Punjabi. And then when that went viral and people were like massively confused as to why I could speak so fluently, and not just fluently, but with a very strong and particular accent, there was this comment of a girl tagging a mate saying, this guy speaks better Punjabi than us and he's only half.
Ooh.
And when I saw only half, that was like the moment where I was like, that's it, isn't it? People aren't seeing me as Punjabi, they're seeing me as half Punjabi, which is why this is confusing. And so my response to that was the hashtag Both Not Half, and that's sort of how Both Not Half sort of came about. But yeah, it was like realizing that that I had just inherited this fractional mindset and language, and that actually I could change it, and I could push back and draw attention to that and be like, actually no, I'm not half. What about me is half? And I think part of this comes from an idea that identities are, this is another sort of like colonial legacy, like the idea that identities or nationhood or national identity, all these sorts of identities are somehow fixed in time, and therefore there is a pure version, and then there's all these sort of watered down versions. And that's not what identity is. Identity is this constantly evolving process. And what a Punjabi looks like in 2025 is me. What a Jamaican can look like in 2025 is you. That's not to say we are typical representations of those cultures, but it doesn't mean we are in any way lesser or diminished in our experience of those identities.
I think it's what just came into my head then was, in terms of our identity is something that we carry, but do we carry it securely unless other people see it? So our use of the language, oh no, I'm quarter, is me trying to explain to them why they can't see it.
Right, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's me using language that I really have no business using, because maths doesn't come into it, but I'm using it to try and help other people see me or understand. So, like, for instance, when I was at school, everyone thought I was white.
Yeah.
And I remember being outside the school, and my dad was waiting for my dad to come and pick me up. And the black lads in my school run things. They were the cool. They were the cool. You wanted to be in with them. They were funny. They were cool. And I remember them outside catching joke with me, saying, "Come on, Hayley, you're going to give us a lift home. You ask your dad." And then I was like, "No, I don't. I don't think I don't think I can. Sorry." And then they were like, "Why is your dad racist? Is your dad this? Is your dad that?" And then literally, it was the summer, and my dad goes really black, and then he pulled up, and they all just went,
"Oh,
what?" And I didn't say anything, and I was just like, "Yes, it's my dad."
Yeah.
And like the next day at school, it kind of spread like wildfire. Did you know Hayley's black? Did you know? Or no, they didn't say, "Did you know Hayley's black?" They just said, "Did you know that Hayley's got a black dad?" And then it came out that, like, instead of thinking, no, at first I think they were like, "Hayley, come on, you're one of us now." You're like, and
Right,
that's, and then at first I was like, I remember thinking, well, this is just a bit racist, isn't it? What? I can only be part of your group if, like, it felt so uncomfortable. And I was kind of happy about it. But then there was almost the negative feelings started, and responses where people will start questioning me and saying, well, why don't you talk black? Why don't you talk like us? Or why don't you, like, we don't understand. Are you ashamed? And that was it. Then they stuck on that, because you know what kids are like. And they're like, you must be ashamed of your black side. Right, that's why you don't why you don't dress or talk or. And I was like, I am just who I am. And then they used to sing that show your true colours. You know, that show your true colours. I used to get sang that down the corridor.
God.
Yeah, so a lot. I've had to unpack a lot from that childhood, but I just remember constantly feeling like I had to justify and be like, no guys, I'm raised by my mom, and this is again why I wanted to talk to you about the change in your cultural identity, and because my mom died, so I was raised by her and predominantly around her family, but then her family, my grandparents died, my grandfather died, she died, and my relationship with my dad and his family strengthened in my 20s. And then I had children with a black man. So my family was his family. So that's almost grown. And my connection to my Jamaican family has grown. So what I grew up feeling is very different to how I feel now. So again, that...
And I think, the settings within which you're raised like have a huge, impact. I think the reason why I feel so Punjabi and my Punjabiness is because I was raised for a long time with my Punjabi grandparents. I was raised in an extended family environment where I was spending a lot of time with my Punjabi grandparents, speaking Punjabi, eating the food, engaging in cultural activities, like all of that. So, I just wanted to, the thing you said about like wanting other people, that sort of using the language, the fractional language as a way to get seen. And I wonder whether this is something that I sort of came to understand through writing the book, was that, so I used to say something like, as a way of sort of diffusing that situation where people give you the funny look, I would say things like, and it's awful now, and I almost feel embarrassed like saying it, but I wrote about it, so I will. I would say like, oh yeah, my dad's Indian. They're like, oh, but you look so white. And I would say something like, yeah, I guess he just didn't put much effort in that night.
Some jokes and some lyrics there.
And it would normally, and it's just like,
how did that land though? Sometimes
I always get a laugh because what it is what I realised, and I didn't realise at the time when I was writing, what I realised is that I was taking responsibility for their discomfort.
This is what I'm saying. This is,
And actually what I've come to understand now, I am very, very comfortable in letting other people feel their discomfort. I will just assert when people, I got somebody who started questioning me. What I was literally stood at a urinal at a South Asian creatives Christmas party a couple of years ago, and a guy was like stood next to me, like questioning me, like how I happened to be there.
Yeah.
And I just said, because I'm Punjabi, and then just carried on focusing on peeing.
Just turned down.
And he was looking really confused. And then I said something to him in Punjabi, which I don't think he spoke anyway. And that just sort of shut him up.
Yeah.
But and this is why, I came to really find a sense of solidarity between, my experiences and queer and particularly trans experiences around, this idea of disclosure. Whenever you introduce yourself to somebody and they sense that there is some difference that they don't understand, there is almost like this pressure. They feel entitled to your life story. And actually they're not. That's their problem. It's not on you to like make them feel more comfortable. And I think that's just something I've just got very, I've taken a lot of inspiration from the queer community in that, and also just like found that within myself to just like really confidently claim and assert my identity. And just, and if they want to ask questions about it and do so sort of respectfully, then that's fine. If it's appropriate in the given situation, not if you're just like, taking my drinks order at a restaurant, but like if we're like having a conversation, fine. But I've really come to, I just don't tolerate or, I don't take responsibility for other people's discomfort anymore.
Yeah. And would you say that you're less triggered now? Because I imagine doing the book and talking the way you do makes you
it doesn't
triggered. Because I get I've had to accept, and it took me a long time to accept that I was being triggered, and it took my social media following to say, Hayley, that wasn't a response, that you're being triggered. And other people that have gone through this identity reflection and things yourself, looking at me and going, Hayley, you're being triggered. So one example is when I was interpreting for multicultural business awards, and Richard Blackwood was a stand-in who got a last-minute replacement of the host, and he was making jokes at with the audience, and then referred to me as the interpreter being not going to be able to understand the demographic and the language in the room.
I saw you posted about this. Yeah.
Because predominantly black, and I was just there, and then he started just going on like a little joke I can take. I have dealt with jokes about this kind of thing my whole life, and it just gets brushed off. But he was going on, and then he asked me what's the sign for rotted, and there's no sign for rotted. It's an expression. There's no word, and everyone was laughing. And my response was to put my middle finger up, which was just really unprofessional. And it meant I broke my connection with my deaf audience, because essentially I'm there to aid their access.
Of course.
And if I'm triggered and my cognitive process can't operate on the level I need it to, their access gets broken. So although I'm just doing this going like, that's a sign, it actually affected me doing my job. And then afterwards, when I was looking at it, and I'm looking at how I'm laughing and I'm using comedy to kind of deal with something that afterwards I think I was triggered, because that is my, I'm in a room full of my and someone said it to me like this. They said, Hayley, when you're in a room full of your family but you look like the oppressor, you have to explore them layers. And I just was like, okay, how do I do this? Then a week later I met you. So I was like, something's happening. So I think I posted about that experience, and I had so many people reach out to me and say, Hayley, that wasn't okay. And I was like, oh, I've had that my whole life. Oh, was that not okay? Am I okay to feel like I was triggered? So I really can relate.
I think I don't think the feeling of, I think a trigger. The trigger happens. I think whether or not the gun goes off is then a different thing.
I think because I was working and I had a cognitive responsibility to deliver. That's why I feel like it was a trigger, because it shut that down. Because I was dealing with whatever that,
of course,
that feeling was, shut down that cognitive ability. So that's what I had to understand. And I've got a friend who's doing her PhD in on racism within the interpreting profession, and so we've talked about your appearance. So like there's a network called Interpreters of Colour Network, which I got asked to join, and I was like super like I'm getting recognised as interpreter of colour. But then again, I stopped and recognised, oh, I'm a little bit triggered in this environment, like, and my cognitive abilities is not working because I'm dealing with something. Because I feel like, because you had your language.
This is a huge. It's like my trump card.
Yeah.
It's like I can use that to sort of, it sort of legitimizes me instantly.
Yeah.
When I speak, and so it's a little bit of like it is like a secret weapon that I can just be like, if I need to, I can just sort of demonstrate that.
Yeah.
I think I've become more resistant to doing that because I'm aware that that's not good. It's just like another way of like trying to diffuse somebody else's discomfort. But I think that's probably what has given me the confidence to do what I'm doing with Both Not Half. Because actually, and I'm very clear about this when I speak, I'm like, I don't think you should have to be as fluent as say I am in the language to sort of feel legitimate. There are plenty of, brown South Asians living in Britain, grew up in Britain, born in Britain, who don't speak their sort of ancestral languages, and they don't get interrogated in the same way. I was about to say, like, and they don't have their identity questioned or have a question about their own identity. They do, actually. I think that's this sense of questioning one's identity and like, am I really enough of this or enough of that? Like, in a world where things are sort of so complex and multifaceted, I think it is actually a very universal experience, but they're not interrogated in the same way.
Do you think because of the visuals? Do you think we're just very visual creatures and we like to box people in terms of how people look?
Yeah, I think it's also just the way like society is ordered through categorization. And I think when we live in a world that is not really set up with fluidity in mind, like order and administration, the census was part of how colonialism worked, the ability to document like populations and then categorize demographics. It's almost like we were living like life, then these categories got put on us, and now we're trying to live life through the categories. And actually the categories are kind of meaningless. They're like tools that can be somewhat helpful in very particular administrative circumstances, but we've sort of structured and developed this world around us which is very, very binary. You're this or you're that. You're in category A or you're in category B. The idea that you could somehow be in both at the same time, move fluidly between them, or not exist in either of them, it doesn't really compute. But that is what we experience in our day-to-day lives, and it's almost like we've forgotten, or we're unable to, because we think that sort of categorical approach to life is somehow more real or more valid or more legitimate, that we're sort of craving that, whereas actually we can just reject it as the sort of made up boxes that they are.
I think now in terms of the sociological model of racism and stuff like this, is we've just got more access to more information now, so the average Joe is able to pick up the information and learn about these bases of society, like the categories, and how it shaped our understanding of one another. And like, it makes me think of, I'm only ever, and I've always challenged this, and I'm only ever recognised as being Jamaican, or someone will say you've got some black in you when I'm cussing someone, or I'm being aggressive. And I'm like, wow, that is racism at its finest. Like, how are you going to tell me? I'm like, my experience of only being recognised as Jamaican heritage when I'm angry or I'm cussing someone out. Like, how is that not just the backbone of the racism that we allow to continue for us? And we have to take responsibility for challenging those categories and those understandings that we have. Being angry and dancing as well. Being sexy and twerking, again, all that. Again, like, what do we, and I wonder if that's, because I know you want to obviously open up conversations into the Caribbean community more.
Yeah.
So that might be a different perspective in terms of, because you said your language has been your trump card. Whereas mine has been when I cuss someone out. It's not quite the same.
Yeah, I think it's like when you can sort of demonstrate some sort of something that they think is like incontrovertible proof of like connection to culture.
Yeah. But what do we define as our culture, and where's it really come from? Because again, a lot of my Jamaican family, I used to get so like nervous about cooking for my Jamaican family because it's all about the seasoning and the sugar. There's a lot of sugar in Jamaican food, and it's not very healthy. And you know, but that's what it has to be. And I'm like, but it's not healthy. And that Jamaica was the sugar, you know, capital, and they destroyed the island from forcing the production of sugar for the whole world. And as a result, Jamaicans have the highest rate of diabetes. But instead of looking at it like that, they will look at it as, this is our food, this is our, and I love that. And I love my Jamaican food, and I don't want to take that away and challenge that. But at the same time, I do look at it like, look back a bit further, and it's
and I guess this is the thing I was talking about, like the idea of like identity being something that evolves over time, and feeling like we have legitimacy to contribute to that evolution. There's not like a fixed, you know, there's not a fixed perfect Punjabiness. I think I said this in a conversation I had recently, that there's not like some like perfect ideal of what it is to be a Punjabi that is like sat somewhere in a vault, and that, you know, whenever they want to like calibrate somebody to, you know, how Punjabi is this person, let's get the perfect ideal and like make some comparisons. Like it's this constant evolution and process. And I think as mixed people, sometimes it can feel, when society is and people around us are sort of questioning our legitimacy to sort of fully inhabit that culture, then understandably you feel maybe a bit hesitant to be engaging in the evolution of that culture, because sometimes it then just becomes about like sort of almost like collecting tokens of a culture to sort of wear them as badges and be like, yes, look, I am really a part of this, instead of just being like, you know what, this is, you know, like you said, like a traditional Jamaican recipe, but actually, because I want it to be a bit healthier, I'm going to make it a bit differently. Like, and that becomes your version of that recipe. And, you know, and I'm sure for your kids, that's still very legitimately Jamaican food.
The grandma would.
But I think that, you know, the food thing's really interesting. It's like, you know, so Guru Nanak Dev Ji, founder of the Sikh tradition, he would not have eaten samosas, aloo parathe, aloo gobi, like dishes that are considered quintessentially Punjabi. And the Punjab was the origin of the Sikh tradition. Like Guru Nanak Dev Ji would not have eaten any of those dishes because potatoes were introduced to India by colonial forces.
Wow. And who is this gentleman?
Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he was the founder of the Sikh faith.
Right. Wow.
So somebody who is considered, you know, like synonymous with Punjab. Likewise, the dishes synonymous with Punjab, but he would never have eaten them. And this is the thing, it's like there is a constant evolution, a constant growing development. And I think we forget that we are creating history every day. It's this constant process. And I think I've really come to just sort of accept, but I think I've really just sort of like sit in that now, and I'm like, cool, I am getting to pioneer what my version of Punjabi just looks like for me. Which is not to say I think that my version is definitive either. Like my version is in conversation with every other version that is out there. And it's funny, you know what? I was in India earlier this year in February, March, to do the Jaipur Literature Festival. And after the festival, I went to Punjab to see family. And in a way, despite the fact that when I'm visiting my family in my family's town, village, it's not a tourist destination, I stick out like a sore thumb. Like, but I almost felt more able to just be Punjabi because in that environment, my familiarity with the culture and the language means that, because I'm around people who don't speak English. So when I'm speaking Punjabi, I'm not speaking Punjabi necessarily. I'm just speaking the language that they speak.
You're speaking your language, your first
yeah,
language.
but it's like, it's not, it's maybe initially people are like, oh, he speaks Punjabi. That's like, but then it's like, but that's the language, the only language they speak. And therefore it's the only means of us communicating. And so there's no sort of conscious like, oh, he's speaking Punjabi in the way that, you know, perhaps if I'm in the UK speaking Punjabi, people are more aware that we're speaking a different language. Whereas in India, we're just speaking the language.
But how do you cope with that constant awareness that people have of you speaking what you would just probably describe as your first language?
I don't know.
Because it's a lot. That is a lot. You're talking.
But that's what I mean. But I only
language.
have that awareness in the UK. When I was in India, because it was just the language that we were speaking, there was no sense of it being different. And so as a result, I felt so much more at ease in my Punjabi-ness.
Right.
Because even when I was like going around the bazaar and stuff, like with my cousin, like running some errands, I'd get a few looks initially. Once people realised that I was, you know, so-and-so's cousin and that I spoke Punjabi, they just got on with their days. They didn't care. Like,
so it definitely has been a trump card for you in terms of being able to assert your...
yeah, but I think what I'm saying is that, like, I sometimes find that it's more in the UK that I'm having to assert it.
Really?
In India, once it's known, it's just then accepted. There's no interrogation. Because I think in India, like, you know, in Punjab, everybody's Punjabi.
Yeah.
There's no sort of like, nobody's going around in Punjab being, you're not Punjabi enough. You're just in Punjab, you know, like it'd be the same in Jamaica. Nobody's going around being like, you're not Jamaican enough. Like, you're just a Jamaican, aren't you? Like, it's just whether you like dancing or whether you're softly spoken or quick to anger. Those are just, they become just personality traits. They're not sort of like traits of identity when you're in those environments. And I think that's sometimes when we're in an environment like the UK where identity is being questioned and interrogated, we're sometimes quick to latch on to certain things to be like, this is a marker of this particular identity. And so
it's quite a British thing, you think, in terms of needing like those tick boxes as well. Like everyone hates them, don't they? And I think I think a professor said to me it was designed it's the intention behind designing those tick box forms has not been a good one from what I hear. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I think maybe you're right in terms of British just being a little bit more specific, because British people, the British government, they can take away your citizenship in a way that no other place can.
I think
the rules of the grandparents' heritage. We're the only country that do that. I'm not intelligent enough to know the ins and outs of it, but I know
that's a really interesting and horrifying aspect of the law in this country, and it's also a very modern thing. Like before, like the First World War, that was impossible. You know,
it's illegal to leave someone without citizenship, isn't it?
Statelessness, it can't be made stateless unless, and this is how the British government have worked around it. Like, if you can claim citizenship elsewhere, which is what
through grandparents,
something like that. So, and it's
Britain are just different.
But this is like this idea that identity is somehow. You made me think like whether it is a particularly British thing, because there is this sort of particularly British mindset, as like there is an idea of what Britishness is, and it's very sort of vague and loose, but it's sort of very much around, it's a kind of deference to the institutions and, you know, ideas like the monarchy and if you try and challenge the way in which society is structured in the UK in any meaningful way, you get sort of cast as being like unpatriotic, and that you somehow hate your country. And actually, when I was researching my book, I discovered that this was like very deliberately created, this idea, in like the early 1800s, because there was this massive like working class movement for greater representation in Parliament, called the People's Charter, that movement, this mass working class movement, was getting more and more popular, and the government were trying to like basically crush it, and they realised that they couldn't crush this sort of like this sort of spontaneous growing like national consciousness, because like this was against the backdrop of like revolutions in France and America, where like ideas of, you know, citizenship and nationhood were sort of reshaping the world. And so the British authorities very cleverly decided that, you know what, we're just going to take control of the narrative. We're going to define what it means to be British.
Right.
And so this historian called Thomas Babington Macaulay wrote this book called The History of England. And basically his introduction, he says it explicitly in his introduction to explain, you know, the reason he's not writing it as some sort of, you know, like a neutral, unbiased, sort of balanced account. He's like, this is going to be, I think the exact words were, the general effect of this checkered narrative will be to excite thankfulness in the hearts of all religious minds and hope in the breasts of all patriots. For the history of our country over the last 160 years is eminently the history of physical, of moral, and of intellectual improvement. So he set out this idea that I'm going to tell you how great we are. Like, this is like, and it's like British exceptionalism, this idea that we've got this fantasy that and in doing that, by setting the narrative, it meant that anybody who then questioned, you know, anybody who's actually like, you know, what about those Chartists? And actually, should we maybe, you know, have a bit more representation in Parliament? And be like, you hate your country. Why do you hate your country?
This is why I hate the term white passing, because it's almost like you pass the exam and it just emphasizes white, like, supremacy and stuff. And I just, I don't like that term. And that term is often put on me, white passing.
White passing, yeah.
Is that something that you get?
Yeah. I think passing is a term that I've come to resist slightly, because I think it privileges the perspective of, you know, the other person. Like, I don't set out to pass, you know. I look the way I do, which is why I tend to say white presenting.
White presenting, there we go. So I've learned another word to use, because sometimes you just don't know what to use. And I'm forever listening to like people, especially in the deaf community, because obviously they have sign language, and sign language is such a visual language. It doesn't have time for any of the PC terms or the intricate meanings of things. It's just visual. So to explain to a deaf person, oh, you shouldn't like say that, you know, we want to think differently, is really challenging. And I think this is why these kind of conversations are really important. So I had a deaf lady recently say, "Oh, you're mixed race. Sorry, I can't say that. I don't know what to say." And yeah, sometimes it's just having. I think what's really important, and my dad's always taught this to me, is no matter what, and no matter how much we evolve or how much language evolves, as humans, we need to know and look at the intention of people's hearts.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is it.
100%.
And I think with all this, you know, conversation, it's not to put fear into people. It's just to educate and open people's minds up to explore a bit further in one another, but then also understand the intention of someone's heart. Are they there to offend you? Are they there to be lazy in their ignorance? Are they there to just connect with you? Like, what's their intention of their heart? And see that. I
think this fear thing is like a very deliberate tactic used by like the wealthy and the powerful to be like,
that's really interesting.
Because in none of my actual experiences, say for example, you know, like when my sister was dating somebody who came out as non-binary, started using they them pronouns, I was sort of nervous to get it right, but in no instance where I made mistakes was I sort of like pounced upon. Like, I was sort of politely corrected and nudged to sort of like think a bit more. But this idea that, like, you know, I don't know what to say because, you know, it's you know, I'm gonna get, you know, I don't know, put in prison. That whole narrative is a narrative used by sort of reactionaries to create the culture.
Reactionaries being
like, you know, the super conservatives, like people who like are just sort of looking back to the past, being like, we don't need to change anything. Like, you know, this is all woke nonsense. Like, that is their narrative.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite dangerous I try to really push back on that and be like, that you shouldn't be afraid to sort of make mistakes or question. And actually, I think in any reasonable setting, that's not going to be the response. But this fear, this idea that somehow you can't, I just don't know what to say anymore, that's not coming from those communities. It's coming from the people who don't want to sort of give voice to those communities because they want to control the narrative. It all comes down to controlling the narrative. And I think that's, I've just not had any interaction I have with anybody about like mixed heritage identities. And, if some people I feel comfortable with using the term mixed race, like that's fine. If somebody was to turn around and use the term half caste though, I'm not going to like call the cops on them, but I will have a conversation, explain why that's
because
an outdated
you've taken
term.
the role you've took in your book, in your writing, in your work. So I think you're right to do that. You're a teacher now. You're taking on that role. But it's really interesting when you said about the controlling the narrative, because I see that with my interpreting work in the fact of having to translate people's words constantly every day and people that speak. And I've realized that because words are the most powerful thing, and that's why there can be such a fear around them. But, when you've got, it's just clear to me that for me, communication, when I've learnt sign language, is just about connection. That's it. That's all it needs to be about. It's about one person understanding another and them connecting. But what's happened is, like with politicians, with doctors, they will use words to disconnect, will cause a space of disconnect, so that I'm going to use a word that you're not going to really understand in such a way that you can respond to me. So the politician will say things in a way that he knows he's not going to get understanding because there's going to be a level of fear. Am I going to be able to match that language, or is it even academically accessible? So language, again, so when people are tick boxing, booking the interpreter and being accessible, and we'll move on to your work about equity, but it's also really important to be academically accessible. And a lot of people purposely don't try and make themselves accessible because they don't want to be challenged and they don't want connection. They want that disconnect because they want to control the narrative. So I feel like language is such a powerful thing. And I find that really interesting. That's how I see things around me, and it's why I'm so drawn to sign language, because it eradicates all that.
Right. Yeah.
It really does. It's the only language you need to look people in the eyes.
Right. Yeah.
And it's, for me, as a hearing person, we all need to be learning it. If you can have a language and you can look at your phone and speak, and all this is going on, and it can, for me, sign language needs to be in the hearing world, in the curriculum, for more reasons than we understand.
I fully agree. That's such a beautiful way of putting it. That it's sort of inherently connective.
It really is, and it's not just about equality and equity. So what is it that you do with that? Because I know that's another part of your work. And
so I'm so it's not necessarily work. I volunteer. It's I'm a counsellor with my trade union Equity, which basically means I'm elected to the executive committee of the union, which is like the governing body that sort of sets, decides on policy and the sort of day-to-day like general running.
Did you have to have qualification? How do you get into something like that?
So it sort of came about through, I initially stood for election to the Race Equality Committee, which is the committee that sort of advises the union on issues of race and equality. I found that that was really helpful. It sort of educate me in what a trade union actually does.
Right.
And once I saw, the more experienced I got, I realized I wanted to have more say in decisions. So the Race Equality Committee was great at sort of offering advice and input on issues of race and equality, but we didn't necessarily have like decision-making power. But the council, the executive committee, does. And I was really interested in sort of helping guide the union into being a much more sort of a fighting union, a union that was really active. It wasn't just sort of, I just felt like because of the way in which trade unions were really, attacked and demolished in this country during like Thatcher's years and during the 80s and 90s, I sort of grew up not really knowing what trade unions were and what they did. But once I really understood that they existed to sort of fight on behalf of workers, create solidarity, negotiate contracts, terms and conditions, all of these things, I was like, it'd be really cool to be able to make more of a, have more of a say in the direction of our union. So yes, stood for election to the council, which is, you know, I'm in my second term now, and it's been wonderful because we have moved the union, you know, into a much more radical position. We're taking on, you know, casting databases. We're negotiating. We're getting like terms into the new film and TV contracts, which, you know, one of the big things that I struggled with when I started off was the way in which self-tapes are used in the industry. This is like auditions that you film yourself at home. And they started off as a sort of workaround for, like, you know, I think I did my first one. I was filming a TV show in Morocco. I couldn't make the audition, so I filmed a few versions of the scene on my phone and I sent them off. And that was a way, you know, it was a solution. And then after COVID, it's become like the standard way most first round auditions are done now.
Really?
So it's a really lonely, isolating, alienating experience for any, particularly like new actors, young actors,
Because you need it face to face.
yeah, you don't meet casting directors, you're not
connected.
meeting directors, you're literally just sat in your room doing it, and it's like, you know, unpaid labor. And you're normally having to get, you know, a loved one or a friend to basically do the job of the casting director or assistant and read in the other lines, and then you got to edit it and send it off. And
You're not networking either.
yeah, you're not networking. And then there's a class element to that as well. Obviously, you know, if you know, you live in London and, you know, you went to a fancy school and you're frequently going to the theatre, or, you know somebody who's an actor, you're getting that networking through just your environment. But if you're, you know, from perhaps a working class background without any of that access, auditions could potentially be a way in which you could start to get to know people in the industry, meet other actors in the waiting room, get to know casting directors or directors, producers. Self-taping has killed all of that. So, and again, this is, you know, the function of a trade union is to sort of build worker solidarity, but also like educate, generate class consciousness. And so self-tapes was a thing that I was really passionate about. I helped author some guidelines, which some casting directors are following, others aren't. And now, you know, this is like in terms of like steering the direction of the union, we've now got it to a point where those guidelines we're hoping to get into like contracts. So once things are into contracts, they then become enforceable. And that's sort of the way in which we're trying to shift like the culture in the industry. So it's about really, and I think probably the simplest way of explaining it is that we live in a society that is very much structured around money and the economics and how much we can earn as workers in order to participate in that system. And often you have very little power because, you know, your boss has basically got, there's an asymmetrical power relationship between like your employer and you as a worker. And unions sort of exist to give you power as a collective of workers to take on employers. And that's how I got involved, because I wanted to make a difference. I realized that actually I'd probably have more of a chance to shape the world around me through my union than I would through any other sort of means.
Because it's policies and less.
Yeah, and it's about work. You know, that's like what a lot of our life is working. So instead of trying to, you know, appeal to people to be like, maybe you could treat us a bit nicer. How about we change the contract so you have to treat us nicer? And then maybe by doing that, then the culture changes, because then it becomes less acceptable to do. You know, weekends never used to be a thing. Like that was a thing that was sort of won by trade union activism, and now it's, you know, somewhat less acceptable to sort of expect people to work until they drop dead. You know, somewhat, I say. But you know, that's how you can, through union activism, change workplaces, you change workplace culture, you can change culture more generally. So that's how I got involved, and it gives me a real sense of empowerment, and it's also been great. It's been really educating for me as well. I think we were discussing before we started recording, it was through my trade union education that I came to understand, you know, the social model of disability and the idea that, you know, people are disabled by society, that they are not inherently disabled. And I I can't remember quite how you put it, but the sort of the parallels between the sort of the both not half stuff. The idea that that it's not, I'm not inherently halved, or you're not like inherently quarter. Those labels and that sort of way of being carved up is done to you by society in the same way.
It's the big D and the little d, which is a conversation that's often talked about in the sign language community, because you would have, I mean, like you said, it's all about money, it's all about your labour. So the government has very much tried to make deaf people, as soon as they're born, hearing by putting cochlears in and making them lip read, and sign language was banned for many, many years. And I still meet clients now. I'll go up and they're still just so overjoyed to have a hearing person sign for them. And they say, oh, we had to learn under the bike sheds hiding, because it was literally forced upon them that they weren't allowed to sign. And I still meet people and it makes me shiver. And I think sometimes we live in this inclusive and accessible world now, but we're forgetting a lot of what was, and there's a lot of damage control that needs to happen still. And yes, we've got to aim for a different type of society, but we've also got a lot of damage control going on. And listening to you talk about policies and things and that
because it's inclusive, they want to be inclusive so that you can be more productive and work.
I mean, I think they've proven that someone on, basically, he's like, a deaf person will be born and we'll just pay you to be deaf, and you just, we'll give you some money and you can just be deaf. But now we've got a bit more of an understanding that actually this deaf person, they've lost one sense, but they've got a massive other sense, and they're quite useful in the workforce. And we've got a different perspective on things. And actually, I think they did the maths, and if you get someone in work, or if you pay me a lot of money to support that person in the workplace, you are saving the country money in terms of just paying them to be deaf and giving them benefits to live off. You will save. But like you said, everything's about money. But this is, I think, money.
A really good example. So, obviously we would want to have a more inclusive society because it is a good thing to have an inclusive society.
But we think it's because of it's being really compassionate and it's the nice thing to do. But it's not. It's just we're not harvesting the gifts that live in people that are exceptional because they experience life in such a exceptional way. So I think
as soon as you said it, I just passed a sign on the way here for a TV show called Code of Silence. Have you come across it yet?
No.
I did some voices on it, like background voices. It's about I need to remember this correctly. It's like a police crime drama where a deaf woman is sort of brought on board to help solve the crime because of,
I've heard of it,
her ability to lip read.
Oh, amazing! I need to watch this. It's all.
I did a few like little voice bits on it. So I've seen.
What do you mean voice bits? Were you her voice?
I work as a voice actor as well, so like I do like background voices for like
cool.
film and TV stuff.
That's cool. I could be voices. I get paid to be voices. Deaf people. I wonder if I could branch out. So.
But that's a really interesting I'm sometimes resistant to the idea that inclusivity should only be encouraged because it promotes like profit. I think that's, but on the other hand, I think that's also, where trade union activity can be, or, thinking of how we can shape society through workplaces is really effective, because by creating workplaces that are more inclusive of deaf people, of course, you create a society that is more inclusive.
I think as well, it needs to start with education, because I'm just thinking about my friend who posted up about her experience at the doctor's surgery. Doctor's surgeries, I'm sure you can relate to the receptionist at a doctor. Just I don't know what it is about doctor's surgeries and the receptionist staff. But there's just something that needs to happen with that. Maybe if they get a union, I don't know. But so I've just lost my train of thought thinking about the receptionist. But
inclusive workspaces, was that?
So what I'm saying, so if that receptionist team or that doctor's surgery had a deaf person working there, then it would be different. But I think we need to strip it back just a little bit to education, and where we're very segregated in our education systems, where the deaf schools are closing, and even that there's a lot of it's called Alfie. They're campaigning for no segregation and just inclusive education. So you are in class with disabled people.
Yeah.
You are responsible for how they learn. They are responsible
Yeah.
for how you learn. And it's not a case of, let's just put this person in sets and they're really high achievers and then they're over here. Of course, we're going to have a society that doesn't know how to look after one another. We're segregating people from the classroom.
I've got a chapter in the book about class, where I talk about my union activity and all that. And one of the things I came across, I thought I was going to write, that chapter was going to look quite different when I started writing it. But what I realized when I was writing it was actually what Both Not Half had taught me was that hierarchies could be challenged, because halfness is essentially part of, like, you know, a hierarchy of whiteness with white at the top. And Both Not Half made me realize that hierarchies themselves are part of the problem. And one way in which we create these, you know, our hierarchical society is this idea of meritocracy. The idea that,
meritocracy, you're going to have to explain that one, Jassa.
The idea that you, you know, that everybody's can, you know, if you work hard and you succeed, then, you know, you've deserved that success. And that's somehow, that is a society that we should sort of be aspiring for, where those who work the hardest can go the furthest.
Say that word again, because I need to bank that one.
Meritocracy.
Meritocracy.
Yeah.
I'm not very good with my words, but yeah.
And that idea, the idea of we live in a meritocracy where actually, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you work hard, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, so you'll be fine. Like, we've sort of held this up as like an ideal, like this is somehow something that we should aspire to. Actually, the word meritocracy was invented as a critique of this idea. The idea, because the problem with the meritocracy is that if you know, whoever's at the top is there because we've agreed that they deserve to be there, it also holds true that whoever's, you know, suffering at the bottom, they deserve to be there. Nobody deserves to be at the bottom of anything. And like, there's this, and it comes back to what you were saying before about a lot of these hierarchies and structures, and meritocracy itself is based around, you know, a very sort of rigid school system and exams and particular kinds of learning and particular kinds of knowledge and skills. And actually, you know, when it was, you know, when we all went into lockdown and we figured out who was actually important to like society, who the key workers really were.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the people that we would consider normally to be, you know, at the top of this meritocratic pyramid.
That's, I love this word. I'm going to have to bank it. And I might text you and say, what's that word again? Because I'm really bad with them. But it basically just defines why I've called this podcast Inadequate Mother, is because I have such a high achieving daughter.
Right.
And it was almost like my trump card to just do whatever I wanted. Because I would always get that, she's a credit to you.
Yeah.
And we say it as parents, or you hear it all the time. She's a real credit to you. Almost as though say it again.
Meritocracy or meritocratic. Yeah,
I know there's words I just can't say. That is just, you know, because of my daughter's accolades and her achievements, I'm all of a sudden considered a really good mom.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'm feeling less inadequate because of her. And when I called it Inadequate Mother, she was so upset. She was like, no. And I said, listen, the reason I can call it this, and people are like, why are you calling yourself an inadequate mother? It's to challenge that, because, you know, for me to have a real pat on the back and she's a credit to you, then some other mother is feeling inadequate.
Yeah.
You know, and we've got to stop that. We really have got to stop that, because I can tell you now, I'm a good mother, but I've not, you know, she was always destined to tick all those boxes in the school and achieve high. It was always set in her destiny from day one. And me getting that pat on the back, it was good, and it kind of gave me this freedom as a young mom to be like, oh, you know, I'm doing all right. But the reality is that it was just, that was her journey.
Yeah.
And people were just saying, oh, you're a good mom because of that. And I just want to try and get rid of that. Because like you said, it's challenging the other moms that maybe their kids do struggle, but it doesn't mean they're less of a credit to you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I think a lot of us, you know, if we're like, oh yeah, you know, you really deserve that, that's well done, and then you often don't think about what the implications of that are, which is that, you know, somebody less fortunate than you.
I think, yeah, because my mum was so inadequate in her feeling of inadequacy that she drank and she died of alcoholism.
Right, yeah.
So I think it stems from that, is that me having this understanding of myself.
Yeah.
And I mean, this week's episode, I was with a spiritual coach, and we're talking about this inner child that's reflected onto you, like your inner child.
Yeah.
You learn about through your children, and like, you know, and then how that ties into my mum and stuff like that. But yeah, I think her feeling like that has stuck with me in such a way that I didn't want to feel like that, but I also didn't want her. I don't want her to feel like that. And I don't want other mums to ever feel like that.
Yeah.
And I just think we have to reshape, like you said, about the perfect Punjabi in the case.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we have the same with mums and dads, that you've got this perfect idea of what a mum is and a dad is. And ultimately, we just need to stay connected, have community, you know, love one another, and stop overthinking all the other shit. Right.
And I think the danger is, like, in a world that does feel like it's becoming more fractured and fractional, that we become very individually focused.
That is, talking about that the other day.
And actually, I think, the power structures, the sort of the powerful and the wealthy, they love that, because the more we're sort of not speaking to one another, not working together, the more they get to consolidate their power.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is where my trade union activity really comes from. Is about recognizing that and being like, actually, you know what? The thing that they fear the most is us realizing that there's more of us, and that if we work together, we can radically reshape society.
Everyone's been told to be a personal brand now and stay at home and just work on it. Just work on yourself. Be a personal brand. Be a personality. So we've gone from like farmlands where the king and queens into like factories, and now into our own homes.
Yeah.
And it's just constant disconnect.
We're no longer being sort of like exploited by a boss. We're exploiting ourselves. Like
in our house.
Yeah.
We can be whoever we want to be. And this is all well and true.
And it gets dressed up as, you know, you can do whatever you want. It's any opportunity. It's all of that. It's like no, it's abdication of responsibility. Because I have this conversation a lot with people. They're like, yeah, you know, but as an actor now, you know, you can write your own stuff, make your own stuff. It's like, yeah, but like, I didn't get into performing to like be doing everything myself. Like it was for me, like what I loved about being on a film set as a 16-year-old was this sense of this huge team effort. Like we were all on this big adventure together. And then I think, Paul described it as like almost like the Uberification of like all aspects of our lives, or like definitely the Uberification of like acting, is that, you know, you can just be doing everything off your phone for yourself as your own boss, as the writer, director, producer. And actually it's like, no, I don't want, that's not the world I want to live in. I want to sort of live in community and like be creative.
Communities become a commodity though, because we're all building them and selling them.
Absolutely.
What the hell?
Like, yeah, everything
Talk
is
about
like,
the
you know,
capitalism.
become a member of this, join this community. And like, there's,
and I feel like this pressure, like, oh, I should start a community, but then this realization that actually that's just another part of the problem.
Yeah.
Like,
and that
really
for me is where
hard.
like, and again, I just come back to the trade union stuff, because I think that's where, you know, the only times I've seen governments get scared and start trying to change the laws have been when trade unions have taken to the streets. And I think that is the power of a union as well, is that once you get involved in any sort of organizing, it's about realizing that there is a shared responsibility, and you do what you can when you can, and then actually the organization itself can sort of be sustained by that collective effort. So I think that also as well is like, we don't individually have to solve all the questions. All we have to do is just do the best we can possibly do with what we have. And if all that is paying the bare minimum subscription to be a member of your union, those few pounds help those other people do the work that they're doing. You know, you don't, and this is like another part of the mindset shift, because we think in this very capitalistic way. It's almost like we think of our unions as you know, like a Netflix subscription, is that I'm paying this per month, what am I getting back? It's like, what you're getting back is solidarity. What you're getting back is like building a movement, is building an organization that can actually help shape society. You're giving back, you're helping support other people. It's not all about you. It's about
it's a bigger picture. It's about your kids' future. It's about your society that your grandchildren are going to be in. So what are you doing for that? You might not be actively able to do it yourself, but what are you doing? Because we can have that forethought. We know what's coming. We know the characteristics that are growing in us, and our inability to put that down and focus on this, communicate with this person, and like just like you said, be a collective, because that in itself is becoming
Yeah.
a problem. You ask some youngsters to collectively start talking and like engage with one another and put their phones away. It's becoming increasingly hard.
I must admit that is also one of the biggest things that my uni activity has taught me, is like how to have conversations as a large group, how to sort of come to an agreement, or how to have disagreements respectfully. Like there's
You're not going to learn that in many environments nowadays. So
because, and in a way, and I don't think it's not like it's been I think actually those with wealth and power would much rather it be that way.
Yeah.
They would much rather we don't get along.
Yeah.
It is all connected, because actually thinking about my identity led me to realize that there were hierarchical, categorizing, divisive structures that underpinned our society. Once I recognized those, I was able to push back and explain myself as being both, not half. Once I did that and I started to then recognize these hierarchies and structures all around me, that's what then led me to my trade union, and realizing that society, the inequalities we see in society, whether it's racial inequality, economic inequality, actually economic inequality underpins all of these other inequalities. And to combat all these inequalities, a world in which there is in which mixed people feel a true sense of belonging, in which trans people are safe, in which deaf and disabled people are able to go about their lives with ease, is a world in which there is greater economic equality. And so that's why all of this, to me, I always find myself end up talking about trade unions and the need for like organizing labor, is because I think that is the only feasible way I think it is possible. And I think it's actually a way that is available to us. And as I say, I think it is effective, because when people do start to organize, that seems to be the only time those with power and wealth seems to start to get a bit afraid.
Yeah, and I think just to round this off, I think for me as a mother, and feeling inadequate in this area when I've been challenged as someone that's not mixed race enough or white, and then having black appearing children and things like that, is having to accept and look beyond my household and outside, like you said, in terms of trade unions and how society is structured. And having to do that as a parent is quite daunting and it's hard to accept. Like, I look at my children, they are me. They're little versions of me. I'm mixed race, you're mixed race. It's all good. We're all good in this house. But then them forcing me to say, no, Mom, no, you're white, or, you're white appearing and we're black.
Yeah.
And having to have that acceptance where, and I'm like, I push back, because I'm not like a soft mom. Like, I was like, what are you on about? No. You're wrong. And it took me a lot. And, I had to accept what's going on in society, basically, and how they are going to experience life. So in order to understand how we need to parent our children, we need to understand what's going on outside, what's going on in the trade unions, what's going on in society, in order for us to understand our kids and how to parent them. And I did, I had to go and apologize to them, and I said, you know what, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm not going to have the same lived experience that you're going to have. Wow. And it was a really hard thing. And I wanted this episode to really be about, and hopefully trying to connect with other moms that maybe need to accept that, and maybe need to say, I mean,
that's
I don't know.
It's an amazing thing that you were able to do, to sort of reflect, accept that, and then
Yeah, I mean, and it was only from meeting people like yourself, colleagues from the Interpreters of Colour Network, where I literally cried, because when it's on you, when you would go through experiences, and you'll probably find this if you have children, like when you go through your experiences, it's kind of like you can brush it off, you can deal with it, you can process it. But when your experiences are so tied into your child's experiences, and you have to accept it on a real deeper level, and you have to understand it on a bit more of a deeper level. And they heard my apology, and I've had to then put myself in a position where I say, okay, I haven't got that lived experience, who has? And maybe put them around people that might be the same heritage as me, but might be appearing differently, so their lived experiences differently. So it's just having that acceptance, and and connecting with people. And social media is a wonderful way of doing that. You know, you can reach out to anyone and just say, hey, I'm wondering about this, or how do I navigate this? My child's been bullied or something's happened. But yeah, community is...
The experience you've had with your daughters sounds like the experience I had with my sister. Like, 'cause, you know, my sister, you know, describes herself as a brown woman.
Right.
And I am a white man.
Yeah.
And like that, I had the same thing. Like I was like, we're siblings, we're the same. But we have very, very different experiences of the world. And a big part of my journey, and this is, you know, the story of my book, the memoir aspect of my book it's very much about my relationship with myself, my family, my heritage, but it's really in many ways about my relationship with my sister. And that realization that actually we do have different experiences, and I shouldn't be, and I can't be forcing that from her. And I had to basically accept those differences and and take responsibility for my own journey in that.
And it is hard, and it's
like,
really
hard.
It's almost like you feel a disconnect.
100%. It feels like, but actually, in acknowledging it,
you can connect more.
You then you develop a deeper connection. Yeah. Because there's...
I'm glad we've ended it on this, because like I said, I don't think there's enough conversation that is spoke about, because if you are a mom of someone that's mixed, get Jassa's book, man. Just get Jassa's book, reach out and let's talk, because it is safe to talk and it is important to talk, and you need to talk, because these kids be teaching us different ways. It's wokeness, it's not going away, but it's all good and all safe. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Hayley. This has been an absolute joy. Yeah, so